My name is Maria Cristina Gatti, an associate professor at the University of Bolzano, Italy. I've been invited by Professor Gerd Jacobs to give a talk to post on the ABC page during these times of full digital professional activities forced by COVID-19. My talk will be about framing in discourse, specifically frames used in interpersonal interaction in virtual teams. It has been inspired by the coronavirus for two reasons. Firstly, because reading newspaper articles and watching news online in coronavirus times, I realized the wealth of frames that have been used in discourse to talk about the virus. Secondly, because coronavirus has forced us to spend our private and professional lives online. In COVID-19 communication, the most used frames were frames of war. US President Trump used the expression "wage all-out war" several times. For China's Prime Minister, it was a people's war against the virus. And for the French President Macron, for instance, "Nous sommes en guerre," we are at war, and he addressed the French citizens as "my fellow countrymen." We have noticed that the discourse has been reframed using elements related to the domain of football, games, storms, monsters, and so forth. Words in the storm and in the tsunami frames, for instance, have been used to relate to events and actions associated with the arrival and the spreading of the pandemic. Words within the monster framing, instead, have been arguably used to frame the discourse about the behavior of the virus, but in a rather personified way. Clearly, these frames build up multiple mental spaces, eliciting different emotional reactions. Frames strongly affect our interpretation of events and facts. They can change the way we think about and experience the world around us. In these days, my university is closed, so I talk from my workroom at home, which has now become, to use a frame, a professional nest where I virtually see students from 6 to 7 days a week. I realized that my actual work situation is very similar to what I experienced during fieldwork in a multinational food manufacturing company. So again, my talk is on framing in online discourse. And I will analyze the positioning of team members and how participants develop their personal ethos and construct team ethics. First, I will briefly describe the concept of framing in discourse and the meaning herewith attached to ethics. Second, I will analyze the frame networks and in what ways frames relate to and inspire the construction as well as the development of personal ethos and team ethics. I will then conclude my talk with considerations on the contribution provided by discourse analytical tools to the understanding of what takes place in real teamwork communication and the implications that the reading of deeper meanings can have for the activity of professionals who work in the field. Now, what are frames? To use Fillmore's words, frames are coherent schematization of experience or unified frameworks of knowledge. A frame characterizes the background knowledge against which concepts make sense. So, for example, a word like waiter is defined relative to the restaurant frame. Again, to quote Fillmore, a frame is invoked when the interpreter, in trying to make sense of a text, is able to assign it an interpretation by situating its content in a semantic pattern that is known independently of the text. That is, a pattern of shared knowledge based on our experience of the world. In linguistics, the concept of frames is often associated with Bateson. He observed that no move in communication, whether verbal or nonverbal, could be understood without reference to a meta-message. While observing monkeys playing at the zoo, Bateson realized that the monkeys could establish a play frame, and it was only by reference to the "this is play" meta-message that a monkey could understand an aggressive, hostile act from another monkey as play. Goffman, in 1981, used the concept in his investigations of the meanings constructed in social interactions in discourse. He considered frames as fundamentally social and situational. He observed that what takes place in interaction is usually governed by principles implicitly set by the features of a larger situation within which the interaction occurs. For example, a real-life experience is framed differently from a theatrical performance, and a theatrical performance is different from a sitcom. Participants in the conversation deal with what occurs in a specific frame in multiple ways. Central to the understanding of how frames work is the notion of footing or alignment. Goffman observed that while creating frames, people construct alignments or footing between one another and between themselves and what is said in the specific communication context. He proposed that changes in alignment are a common feature of natural talk and typically language-linked. He pinpointed that linguistics provides us with the cues and markers through which such footings become manifest, helping us to find our way to a structural basis for analyzing them. Although the influence of Goffman's work on framing is pervasive in studies on social interaction, there have been few studies applying framing in linguistic analysis of real discourse produced in online team interactions at the workplace. And what do we refer to with ethics and ethos? In the present paper, I understand ethical behavior as behaving consistently to rules, not damaging the other or doing any harm, supporting or investing in the system. Along the same line, ethos is referred to as virtuousness, what individuals aspire to when they are at their very best. It refers to qualities that allow people to excel, referring to Cameron et al. 2004. In the past decade, the pervasiveness of IT tools in the workplace has raised issues concerning the need for a new understanding of ethics in the corporate world. The immediacy of communication and the simultaneous connection to the on and off work environments alter previously defined physical spaces of work and private life. This inevitably changes both the perception and the definition of what is professional and private, therefore opening the discussion concerning companies' rules for appropriate action, employees' duties, and individual virtuousness. In research on business or corporate ethics, few studies have so far examined how in real communication employees manage the boundaries between the private and professional roles in online work and how the negotiations of those boundaries for the readiness of interaction may affect the traditional definition of business ethics. Business ethics typically involves the imposition of specific standards of moral corporate behavior and a cohesive set of rules for appropriate actions. In practice, ethics are understood and implemented as duties, and the corporate ethical regulation aspires to clearly describe the duties and obligations of individuals towards the organization and of the organization towards its stakeholders. In my analysis, instead, I refer to ethics as a situated ethics. I borrow the concept from Banks 2016, where situated implies understanding ethics in relation to the social cultural context of practice and responsibility in a relational sense. As such, ethics also accounts for the motivations and emotions triggered by moral agents and sees moral agents as part of a relational dynamic which takes place between people. My data. The company in which I conducted fieldwork is a food manufacturer that in the last 5 years doubled its income and at present employs close to 1,500 people globally. The swift growth has brought about rapid change, specifically in routine operation, which have grown much complex, diverse, and multinational. During my fieldwork, I was able to collect more than 6,000 exchanges between members of a virtual team, operating between 2 continents and across multiple time zones. One of the biggest challenges for the team was ensuring continuous production in several factories in the US and managing communication with the headquarters in Europe. Because of the specificity of the task, and as the complexity of production work rapidly increased, the lines between the private and the working life of team members blurred, and continuous availability became a requisite. Now, because of time restrictions, I will confine the focus of my analysis to the frames evoked in the exchanges of one day as part of a larger data set, which I collected personally over 6 months. The sample shows interactional strategies which are recursive in the conversation flow of the group. And in addition, the small scale description allows for a more detailed analysis of the multi-layered construction of the frames network and related social dynamic strategies. At the same time, it provides an insight into ways in which ethics is co-constructed among team members, as well as how interlocutors socially make sense of individual experiences and create collegiality by means of moral alignment. What is relevant to the purpose is the participation's ease in shifting in and out of the virtual workplace while creating a univocal online persona. This is done in interaction through the interplay between private life frames and work time frames. Following Goffman, 1981, the overall frame construction can be illustrated as follows. Framework 1 is the dominant work frame, followed by frame 2, Trip to the Woods frame 3, Bear Hunting in the Wood frames, which refer to private life. Then back to sub-frame of the dominant frame 1, Back to Work, which is followed by 2 other frames of private life, frame 4 and 5, Julie Goes to Visit Her Dad frame, and Dad is a Ladies' Man frame. The base interactions are closed with a sub-frame of the dominant frame, work frame, where manager checks on members' availability. For a better understanding of the setting in which the layering of the different frameworks, I will take a quick step back and illustrate the background events to the work frame. Manager is facing a period with a very heavy workload. He is responsible for communication services in both local and overseas factories, travels frequently between 2 continents, has to manage teams across multiple time zones. So far, manager has participated directly in the team's work. Yet, because of the remodeling of management work, manager has to rely increasingly on the team's virtuousness. That is, according to Cameron et al. 2004, the set of qualities that allow people to excel, for example, humanity, integrity, forgiveness, and trust, which are practiced, disseminated, and sustained at both the individual and collective level. And as Cameron et al. Propose, in conditions of change, virtuousness serves as the essential fixed point. Against this backdrop, I will focus my analysis on manifestations of individual ethos or virtuousness in the interplay between private and work-life frames and the implications it may have on the team's ethics. Excerpt 2 refers to frame 2, Trip to the Woods frame. Charles launches the communication thread with a reminder of his trip to the woods. This is framed as a personal necessity inserted in a wider frame of family duties, which portrays time off work and off platform as morally justifiable. Charles emphasizes his emotional involvement in the trip by expressing excitement for the experience, marked by intensive tone. This has the double effect of minimizing his absence from the platform and the actual work of the team, as well as involving the other members in his personal commitment to family life. Turns 3 and 4 contributed to the construction of Charles' ethos. In fact, in line with what O. Higgins and Joel Nye, 2017, maintain, hard work, perseverance, and family commitment are prerequisites to loyalty to the company. The semantics of the trip frame offers a reason for Emma to comment on Charles' vacation by evoking a frame that contains a clear moral hint. Excerpt 2 shows the schema of frame 3, bear hunting in the woods. Emma takes the turn with an old hunter's saying. Sometimes you go into the woods and you get the bear. Sometimes you go into the woods and the bear gets you. The citation evokes the bear hunting in the woods frame, which makes it possible to interpret Emma's utterance in 2 ways. First interpretation. Emma warns Charles about going to the woods when his presence as team leader may be requested. This message could be perceived also as an alert for the members. Dangers are often lurking behind the scene, that is, in areas outside the team's control. The second interpretation hinges on the moral message, namely the balance of success and failure. It can be perceived as an encouragement or even a hint to perseverance addressed to Charles as the team and the team as well. Emma responds to Charles' decision with an alert. We see in turn 6, the bear imperative marks it, then turned into an affectionate warning to be cautious of danger, turn 7. Just look out of bears, where the mitigator just minimizes the imposition. In this way, she shows trust in In this way, she shows trust in Charles' sense of responsibility. The warning softened the effect elicited by so in marked position, and the perception is ultimately of alignment in a tone of camaraderie and companionship rather than a remark. Excerpt 3, subframe 1. Back to the work, which is the subframe of the dominant work frame. The previous 2 frames allowed for a digression from teamwork, to which Kate promptly reacts. Kate takes a professional stance in turn 8 and 10, which reflects her virtuousness as a responsible and reliable employee. In doing so, she contributes to the construction of the team's ethics through the amplifying effect of virtuousness, according to Cameron et al. 2004. As Sunsage and Hill 2001 proposed, when people observe virtuousness, they are inspired by it. Manager acknowledges Kate's reliability, giving her full responsibility for solving the cash credit issue in turn 11. Kate's summoning switches the scene from the conviviality elicited by frame 2 back into the semantics of teamwork. In Excerpt 4, Kate's mention to the days off evoke a frame that leads the conversation back to a convivial atmosphere. However, the fact that Kate will be away on weekdays elicits manager's concern, and consequently he asked her to stay remotely connected regardless. Kate reacts with a positive answer, but cannot conceal a note of irony and sarcasm, turn 15. It seems that Kate feels her ethos threatened by manager's request. However, her sense of duty prevails over all considerations, and the sarcastic comment is immediately followed by a statement that provokes sympathy and softens the assertiveness of the utterance. In this way, she sets the tone for the frame that follows on the behavior of Kate's dad as a bon vivant in spite of his old age. What is interesting in Excerpt 5 is the realignment among members, especially between Kate and the manager, brought about by the jocular, convivial tone of the conversation about private life. Dad is a ladies' man frame, creates an empathetic atmosphere around notes of sensitive humor on human relations and family ties. Through his assertion in turn 19 and 24, manager repositions himself intersubjectively through alignment, thus marking his position available to the others. Excerpt 6 repositions the exchanges of frame or the negotiations of frame in the dominant frame with subframe 2. Manager checks on members' availability, subframe of frame 1. Kate's availability to be reached around the clock has an amplifying effect on the other participants and functions as a motivation prompt. All team members are induced to communicate their availability for effective teamwork. As we see in turn 27, manager sums up participants' availability, namely Kate, Mike, Charles. In the last excerpt, number 7, all the team members eventually provide their availability to make up for the colleague's absence. The mood is happy, relaxed, which creates the conditions for a jocular, convivial atmosphere. I will now conclude my talk briefly, saying that an analytical approach based on framing has provided the means to shed light on the complexity of human social interaction in virtual communication, including the ongoing discursive co-construction of meanings with reference to the moral behavior of team members, their relationships with the others, and business ethical principles. On the basis of my findings, I argue that the blurring of private and professional life not only allows for high levels of interconnectivity and improved social interaction, I refer to Derrick's and Gatti 2019, but also results in enhanced cooperation and a better team performance. Also, constant availability, although presenting the ethical paradox of the reconciliation with the employee's demand for leisure, creates the sense of an open conversational environment which enhances commitment as well as mutual responsibility among team members. Citing Whetstone 2003, individual virtuousness or ethos can serve as the fixed reference in times of change, or as the ethos that guides action when everything else is ambiguous. Finish quote. Moreover, studies on the relationship between virtuousness and performance have shown that virtuous organizations significantly outperform less virtuous organizations. As Rego et al. 2013 in their study on authentic leadership and team virtuousness observed, I quote, boosting team virtuousness may not only promote team affective commitment and team potency, but also support team members' positive affect and engagement, elevating the team's performance. Finish quote. The results of the present analysis supplement organizational literature based on ethics-centered observation of the effectiveness of virtual work and show how a discourse-driven approach can provide tools for further theorizations about the practices and the ecology of digital communication. I close my talk here, and I wish to thank Professor Gert Jakob for this opportunity and the Association for Business Communication. I invite you to contact me at my university email address and come and visit me at the University of Bolzano. Now, take care and stay safe. Thank you.